The harsh wind rattled the shutters of Zara Stone's small cabin as she cradled her infant daughter against her chest, trying to quiet the child's hungry cries while her 2-year-old son tugged desperately at her skirt. 3 days had passed since their last proper meal, and the empty pantry stood as a stark reminder of Thomas Stone's final betrayal before he abandoned his family for the gold fields of California, Montana Territory, 1875. Zara had come west with such hope in her heart, following a husband who promised prosperity but delivered only hardship. Now, at 24, she found herself alone in a remote homestead 10 miles from the nearest town, with winter approaching and not even a chicken left in the yard to provide eggs for her starving babies. "Hush now, Lily," she whispered to the fussing 6-month-old, her own stomach cramping from hunger. "And please, Henry, Mama needs to think." The little boy's blue eyes, so like his father's, welled with tears. "Hungry, Mama," Zara swallowed the lump in her throat. After Thomas left 3 weeks ago, she'd stretched their meager supplies as far as possible. The last of the cornmeal had been used up yesterday morning. The vegetable patch that had sustained them through summer was now barren in the autumn chill. She'd already sold her wedding ring in town last week for supplies that were now gone. She moved to the window, peering out at the mountain-flanked valley. The homestead Thomas had staked claim to was beautiful but isolated, with a creek running nearby and forest edging one side of their small, cleared field. In spring and summer, it had seemed idyllic. Now it felt like a prison. A sound from outside made her heart leap. The distant but unmistakable rhythm of hoofbeats approaching. She clutched Lily tighter, mind racing. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome for a woman alone. Could it be Thomas, returning with his tail between his legs? Or worse, one of the rough men from the mining camps who sometimes passed through? "Henry, stay by Mama," she instructed, moving to the small wooden shelf where Thomas had kept his hunting rifle. The weapon was gone. Of course he'd taken it with him, along with their only horse and most of their money. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Through the window, Zara could see a tall figure dismounting from a chestnut stallion. A stranger, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his posture straight and confident. A cowboy by the look of his clothes and the leather chaps covering his legs. A knock came at the door. Firm but not threatening. "Who's there?" Zara called, her voice shakier than she intended. "Name's Xavier Valero, madam. I'm working at the Double C Ranch over the ridge. Mr. Collins sent me to check on the homesteads in this valley before the weather turns." Zara hesitated. The Double C was the largest cattle operation in the territory, and she vaguely recalled Thomas mentioning the owner, Bernard Collins, though they'd never met the man. "I've brought some supplies," the man continued. "Heard there might be families out here running short with winter coming." At the word supplies, Henry's eyes widened, and he pulled toward the door. Hunger overcoming caution, Zara adjusted Lily on her hip and unlatched the rough wooden door. The man who stood there made her take an involuntary step back. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days outdoors. Dark eyes assessed her from beneath his hat, and a day's worth of stubble lined his strong jaw. But what struck her most was the kindness in his expression as his gaze took in her thin frame, the crying baby, and the small boy clutching her skirt. "Mrs. Stone?" he asked, removing his hat. Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Mr. Collins asked me to bring these." He gestured to his saddlebags. "May I?" She stepped aside, allowing him entry into the small cabin. Xavier Valero moved with a surprising grace for such a large man, setting his saddlebags on her worn table. "It's not much, madam, but there's bread, cheese, some jerky, coffee beans, and a sack of flour." His hands, large and calloused, began unpacking the items. "There's also some dried apples and a jar of honey." Henry's eyes grew round at the sight of the fresh loaf of bread. Zara felt light-headed, whether from hunger or relief, she couldn't tell. Why would Mr. Collins? She began, then stopped, pride warring with desperation. Xavier looked at her directly. "He makes it a point to know who's settling in his territory." Word reached him that Thomas Stone left for California. Mr. Collins doesn't hold with men abandoning their responsibilities. A flush of shame colored Zara's cheeks, so everyone knew her husband had deserted her. Of course, news traveled fast in isolated communities. "I'm grateful," she managed, "but I can't accept charity. When Thomas returns, begging your pardon, madam, but men who leave their families to starve rarely come back." His blunt words stung with truth, and this isn't charity. Mr. Collins considers it an investment in good neighbors. Lily's crying grew more insistent. Zara bounced her gently, trying to soothe the hungry infant. Xavier's expression softened further. "Please, madam, for the children." The mention of her babies broke through Zara's remaining resistance. With trembling hands, she reached for the loaf of bread. "Henry, sit at the table," she instructed, finding a knife to cut thin slices. "Not too fast, remember?" Xavier watched as the boy eagerly but carefully ate the bread. Zara settled in a chair to nurse Lily, who latched on desperately despite the meager milk Zara's starved body could produce. "There's more," Xavier said, returning to his horse. He came back with a small crate containing eggs, a jar of milk, and, miracle of miracles, a small package wrapped in paper. "Sugar," he explained, setting it down. "And this milk is fresh from this morning." Tears welled in Zara's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "I don't understand. Why would you go to such trouble for strangers?" Xavier's dark eyes met hers. "No one should go hungry, Mrs. Stone, especially not little ones." He glanced at Henry, who was already looking better with food in his belly. "And there's something else Mr. Collins wanted me to discuss with you." Zara tensed, suddenly wary. Was there a price for this kindness after all? The Double C needs help at the main house. Mr. Collins's wife is expecting their fourth child, and they're looking for someone to help with cooking and minding the children. He paused. "There's a cabin nearby for you and your little ones. It would mean wages, food, shelter for the winter." Zara stared at him. "You're offering me a job." "Mr. Collins is, but—" He hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "I suggested it. This homestead is too isolated for winter, especially for a woman alone with small children." The pride that had sustained Zara through 3 weeks of Thomas's absence wavered. The practical part of her, the part that had kept her children alive, despite everything, recognized the lifeline being offered. "When would Mr. Collins expect me to start?" "As soon as you're able. I can come back tomorrow with a wagon for your belongings." He glanced around the sparse cabin. "Or today, if you'd prefer not to spend another night here alone." The thought of one more night in this isolated cabin, listening to every creak and rustle, wondering if each sound was a threat or salvation, made Zara's decision easier. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll need time to pack our things." Xavier nodded, relief evident in his face. "I'll return at first light." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Stone, there's something else you should know." Zara looked up, still cradling Lily. "The winter's coming early this year, the pass to California." He hesitated. "It's already snowed in. No one's getting through until spring." The message was clear. Thomas wasn't coming back, at least not anytime soon. "I understand, Mr. Valero, and please thank Mr. Collins for his generosity." Xavier nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Until tomorrow, then." As he stepped outside, Henry rushed to the window to watch the tall cowboy mount his horse. "Is that man going to help us, Mama?" the little boy asked. Zara joined him at the window, watching Xavier Valero ride away, his straight back silhouetted against the afternoon sky. "Yes, Henry," she said softly. "I believe he is." That night, with her children finally sleeping with full bellies, Zara allowed herself to cry, not from despair this time, but from the sheer relief of knowing they would survive another day. True to his word, Xavier arrived at dawn, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. Zara had packed their meager belongings: clothes, a few cherished books, the family Bible, and the handmade quilt her mother had sent west with her. There wasn't much to show for 4 years of marriage. "Morning, Mrs. Stone," Xavier called softly, mindful of the early hour. He wore the same practical clothes as yesterday, though he'd clearly shaved for the occasion. "Mr. Valero," she acknowledged, stepping out with Lily bundled in her arms. Henry, excited by the prospect of adventure, bounced around her skirts. "Big horses." the boy exclaimed, eyes wide with wonder. Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. That they are, young man. Would you like to meet them? Henry nodded enthusiastically, and Xavier lifted him with ease, carrying him to the wagon. This here is Domino, he said, introducing the black gelding, and his partner is Checkers. They're brothers. Zara watched, surprised by the gentleness the rugged cowboy showed her son. Thomas had little patience for Henry's questions and childish enthusiasms. You're good with children, she observed when Xavier returned Henry to her side. A shadow crossed his face. Had a little brother once. He'd be about your age now, I reckon. There was a story there, but Zara didn't press. Everyone who came west carried their pasts with them, some heavier than others. Loading the wagon took less than an hour. Zara took a final look at the cabin that had been her home for the last year, the place where Lily had been born, where she had planted her first garden, where she had waited night after night for Thomas to return from his increasingly frequent trips to town. You can come back in spring if you wish, Xavier said quietly beside her. The land claim is still in your name until it's abandoned for a full year. Zara looked at him sharply. How do you know that? A flush crept up his neck. I asked around, thought you should know your options. His consideration touched her. Most men wouldn't have bothered with such details. The journey to the Double C took most of the morning. As they traveled, the landscape opened up from dense forest to rolling grassland dotted with stands of pine and aspen trees. Cattle grazed in the distance, fat and sleek before winter. Mr. Collins runs nearly 2,000 head, Xavier explained as Henry pointed excitedly at the animals. The ranch covers most of this valley and the next, and you work as a cowhand. Zara asked, curious about this man who had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. Xavier nodded. Going on 3 years now. Started as a drover bringing cattle up from Texas. Mr. Collins offered me a permanent position after the second drive. You're from Texas then? He smiled slightly. Born there. My father was Mexican, my mother from Virginia. They had a small spread near the border until the war came. His expression grew distant. Lost everything in '65, been making my own way since I was 16. Zara calculated quickly. That would make him around 27 now, just a few years older than herself. I'm sorry about your family, she said quietly. He shrugged, but his hands tightened on the reins. Life out here doesn't offer guarantees, Mrs. Stone, just opportunities for those willing to work. They crested a small rise, and Zara gasped. Below them spread the headquarters of the Double C Ranch, a large 2-story house built of solid timber, surrounded by a complex of barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and outbuildings. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and figures moved about purposefully across the yard. It's like a small town, she murmured. Nearly 40 people live and work here year-round, Xavier confirmed. More during roundup seasons. As they approached, Zara grew increasingly nervous. She smoothed her faded dress, acutely aware of how she must appear after weeks of hardship. What if Mrs. Collins took one look at her and changed her mind? Xavier seemed to sense her anxiety. The Collinses are good people, Mrs. Stone, demanding but fair, and Mrs. Collins has been asking for help since their third child was born last year. The wagon pulled into the main yard, attracting immediate attention. A tall man with a graying beard strode toward them, followed by a boy of about 12. Valero, back already, I see. The man's voice boomed across the yard. Mr. Collins, Xavier acknowledged with a respectful nod. This is Mrs. Stone and her children, Henry and Lily. Bernard Collins approached the wagon, his assessing gaze taking in Zara and her children. His expression was stern but not unkind. Mrs. Stone, welcome to the Double C. My wife will be relieved to have your help. He turned to the boy beside him. Jason, go tell your mother Mrs. Stone has arrived. The boy darted off toward the main house. Let's get you settled, Mr. Collins continued. Xavier will show you to your cabin. It's small but weather-tight. Used to belong to our foreman before he built himself a bigger place. Thank you, Mr. Collins, Zara said, finding her voice. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Collins nodded briskly. Valero spoke highly of your situation. Said you were down on luck but not on spirit. We value grit around here. He glanced at Xavier. Get them situated, then see to those strays in the north pasture. As Collins strode away, Xavier helped Zara down from the wagon. His hand was warm and strong around hers, and for a moment she felt oddly flustered by his proximity. "He seems formidable," she murmured. Xavier's mouth quirked. "Don't let the bark fool you. Man's got a soft heart under all that bluster. Had to survive Mrs. Collins." As if summoned by her name, a plump woman with auburn hair piled atop her head emerged from the main house, a toddler balanced on her hip, and the boy Jason trailing behind her. "You must be Mrs. Stone," she called, hurrying over. "I'm Margaret Collins. Oh, look at these beautiful children." Her warm smile immediately put Zara at ease. "You poor dears must be exhausted from your journey. Jason, take their things to the cabin. Xavier, help him." Before Zara could protest, Margaret had linked arms with her. "Come inside for some hot coffee and proper introductions. The men can handle the luggage." Zara glanced back to see Xavier lifting her trunk with ease, her son perched once again on his broad shoulders, squealing with delight. The Collins home was everything Zara's cabin was not: spacious, well-furnished, and emanating warmth both literal and figurative. The kitchen alone was bigger than her entire previous living space, with a massive cast-iron stove, copper pots hanging from hooks, and shelves stocked with more food than Zara had seen in months. Sit," Margaret urged, depositing her toddler in a playpen in the corner. "You look dead on your feet, you poor thing." Before Zara could object to the characterization, Margaret had placed a steaming mug of coffee before her and was slicing thick pieces of freshly baked bread. "Butter and jam," she announced, placing them on the table. "And let me warm some milk for the baby. How old is your little girl?" "6 months," Zara answered, gratefully sipping the coffee. "And Henry just turned 2 in August." Margaret's kind face softened. "And already managing on your own. Xavier told Bernard about your husband's departure." Shame threatened to overwhelm Zara again. "I don't want anyone's pity, Mrs. Collins. It's Margaret, please, and it's not pity to recognize courage when I see it." She sat across from Zara. "Many women would have given up. You didn't." Zara swallowed hard against the unexpected kindness. "I couldn't. My children needed me." "And now we need you," Margaret said practically. 3 children under 12, another on the way, and a household of hungry cowboys to feed. I'm at my wit's end." She patted her rounded belly. "The wages are $8 a month, plus room and board for you and your little ones. Sundays off, unless it's roundup or shipping time when all hands are needed." It was more than fair. Before Thomas left, they'd been scraping by on whatever his occasional odd jobs brought in, supplemented by Zara's garden and the eggs from their now-departed chickens. "When would you like me to start?" Margaret beamed. "Tomorrow's soon enough. Today, rest and settle in." "Xavier mentioned you've had a difficult time lately." A knock at the back door interrupted them. Xavier stood there, hat in hand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Collins, but we've got Mrs. Stone's things at the cabin. Thought she might want to get the children settled before dinner." Of course." Margaret rose. "Dinner's at 6 in the main hall for all the hands. You're welcome to join or take your meal at your cabin. Xavier can show you around the property when you're ready." Xavier escorted Zara back outside, where Henry was enthusiastically chatting with Jason Collins beside the wagon. "Your boy's taken to ranch life already," Xavier observed with a smile. "Been asking about horses since we unloaded your trunk." "He's always loved animals," Zara said. "Thomas never had time to indulge his interests." Something flickered in Xavier's dark eyes at the mention of Thomas, but he merely nodded and offered her his arm. "The cabin's this way. It's not far." The structure he led her to was indeed small, but as promised, sturdy and well-built. It stood a short distance from the main house with its own small yard and a view of the mountains. "There's a woodpile out back, and I've started a fire in the stove," Xavier explained as he opened the door. "Water pump is just there by the side, the privy's behind those bushes." Inside, Zara found a simple but comfortable space: a main room with a cast-iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, and even a small sofa. A curtain divided this area from 2 smaller rooms. One held a double bed, the other a child-sized cot. "It's perfect," she breathed, relief washing over her. Xavier had arranged her few possessions carefully. Her books stood on a small shelf, her mother's quilt was folded at the foot of the bed, and Henry's wooden horse carved by Thomas in happier days sat on the windowsill. "Thank you," she said, turning to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't think on it," he interrupted gently. "You're here now, safe." Something in his voice made her heart quicken. She looked away, suddenly conscious of being alone with him in the small cabin. "I should check the bunkhouse before dinner," he said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "If you need anything, just ask at the main house, or—" he hesitated. "My quarters are in the west bunkhouse, end room." With a nod, he departed, leaving Zara to absorb her drastically changed circumstances. Yesterday, she'd been facing starvation in an isolated cabin. Today, she had food, shelter, income, and the promise of community. All because a cowboy had brought bread and an opportunity when she needed it most. Life at the Double C quickly fell into a rhythm for Zara and her children. Each morning, she rose before dawn to help Margaret prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The men filed in hungry and appreciative, devouring plates of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy before heading out to their various tasks. Xavier was always among them, nodding respectfully as Zara filled his plate. Sometimes their hands would brush, and she'd feel that same inexplicable flutter in her chest. He rarely spoke to her directly during these bustling mealtimes, but she often caught his dark eyes following her movements. After breakfast came the household chores, helping Margaret with laundry, cleaning, baking, and minding the Collins children while Margaret rested. In the afternoons, Zara would return to her cabin for a few hours with Henry and Lily before preparing the evening meal alongside the ranch cook, a grizzled former trail hand named Gus, who had lost an arm in the war. "You got a light touch with pastry," Gus commented one evening as Zara rolled dough for apple pies. "Most ladies press too hard, makes it tough." Zara smiled at the rare compliment. "My grandmother taught me. She said pastry needs to be treated like a skittish horse, firmly but gently." Gus barked a laugh. "Wise woman, speaking of horses, your boy's got himself a champion." "What do you mean?" Valero's been teaching him to ride. "Got him up on that old pony, Butterscotch, gentlest creature on 4 legs." Zara stared at him. "Henry's been riding, but he's only 2. Gus shrugged his good shoulder. "Led around the corral on a lead rope. Boy's natural, according to Valero, been happening during your afternoon breaks." That evening, when the hands came in for dinner, Zara sought out Xavier. He was seated at his usual place at the long table, deep in conversation with another cowboy. "Mr. Valero," she said, approaching with coffee pot in hand. "Might I have a word?" He looked up, surprised. "Of course, Mrs. Stone." They stepped outside into the crisp October evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink behind the mountains. "Gus tells me you've been teaching Henry to ride," she said without preamble. Xavier's expression grew cautious. "Yes, madam, hope that's all right." Boy showed such interest, and Butterscotch is gentle as a lamb. "He's 2 years old, Mr. Valero, nearly 3, Xavier corrected gently. "And most ranch children start that young or younger, always supervised, of course." Zara wanted to be angry, but found she couldn't summon the emotion. The truth was, Henry had been happier these past weeks than she could remember. Each day he spoke excitedly about Mr. X and the horses and the cattle. "You should have asked me first," she said, but the reproach lacked force. Xavier removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "You're right, Mrs. Stone, I apologize, it's just—" He hesitated. "Just what?" "The boy needs a man to show him things, to teach him, I thought." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "You thought what?" Zara pressed. Xavier met her eyes directly. "I thought I could help." "Since his father won't." The blunt assessment stung, but Zara couldn't deny its truth. Thomas had shown little interest in teaching Henry anything, even before he left. "I appreciate your concern for my son, Mr. Valero, truly. But in the future, please consult me before introducing new activities." He nodded, properly chastened. "Yes, madam, so, about the riding lessons." Despite herself, Zara smiled. "They can continue, as long as you're with him every second." Xavier's answering smile made her breath catch. Yes, madam, every second. As he turned to go back inside, Zara impulsively reached out to touch his arm. And Mr. Valero, thank you for being kind to him, Henry. He needs that. Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softening, a warmth. He's a good boy, Mrs. Stone. You've done well by him, despite everything. The simple validation of her mothering, something Thomas had never offered, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, nodding her thanks before returning to her duties inside. That night, as she tucked Henry into bed, he looked up at her with shining eyes. Mama, Mr. X says I can be a real cowboy someday. Can I? Zara smoothed his dark hair from his forehead. If that's what you want, my love. Mr. X is teaching me all about it, Henry confided sleepily. He says I'm a natural, just like my mama is natural pretty. Zara's hand stilled. He said that, but Henry had already drifted off to sleep, leaving Zara to ponder the cowboy's words and the strange warmth they kindled inside her. October gave way to November, and the first snow dusted the mountains surrounding the Double C. The pace of ranch life slowed as winter approached, with the cattle gathered in the lower pastures and the hands focused on repairs and preparations for the cold months ahead. Zara settled more fully into her role, her initial timidity giving way to quiet confidence. Margaret Collins, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, relied on her increasingly, and even Bernard Collins had gruffly complimented her cooking. Never tasted biscuits this light outside of Virginia, he declared one morning, helping himself to a 3rd serving. High praise indeed, Xavier murmured as he passed Zara in the kitchen later. The man measures all cooking against his mother's. Such brief exchanges had become more frequent between them, a shared observation, a quick smile, a moment of conversation while passing on the ranch grounds. Nothing improper, nothing that could raise eyebrows, but enough to create a tenuous connection that Zara found herself anticipating each day. The first major snowstorm of the season struck in late November, just after Thanksgiving. Wind howled around the buildings, and snow piled in drifts against walls and fences. Most of the hands remained in the bunkhouse, venturing out only to care for the animals in the barns. Zara kept Henry and Lily in their cabin, stoking the fire against the bitter cold. By midday, her woodpile was dangerously low. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Xavier, snow crusting his hat and coat, arms loaded with split logs. "Thought you might need these," he said, stomping his boots. "May I?" She stepped aside to let him in. Henry immediately abandoned his toys to run to the cowboy, who somehow managed to ruffle the boy's hair despite his armload of wood. "Brought enough to last the night," Xavier explained, stacking the logs neatly beside the stove. "Storm's supposed to blow itself out by morning." "Thank you," Zara said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. "Would you like some coffee? It's fresh." Xavier hesitated, then nodded. "Much obliged." He removed his coat and hat, hanging them by the door, then crouched to accept the wooden horse Henry was proudly showing him. Lily, now nearly 8 months old and crawling enthusiastically, made her way across the floor toward the visitor. "She's growing fast," Xavier observed, smiling as the baby reached for his boot. "Too fast," Zara agreed, pouring coffee into her 2 precious china cups, wedding gifts that had somehow survived the journey west. "They both are." She handed him the coffee and gestured toward the small table. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play. "You've made a real home here," Xavier said finally, his eyes moving around the cabin. Zara had added small touches over the weeks. Wildflowers dried and hung in bunches, a colorful braided rug she traded laundry services for, curtains sewn from fabric Margaret had given her. "It's just temporary," Zara reminded him, though in truth she had begun to think of the cabin as home. Xavier studied her over the rim of his cup. "What will you do come spring?" The question had been weighing on her mind. "I don't know," she admitted. "Return to the homestead, I suppose, try to make a go of it somehow." "Alone." His voice was neutral, but his eyes were not. Zara stared into her coffee. "I don't have many options, Mr. Valero." "Xavier," he said quietly. After all this time, I think you might call me Xavier. She looked up, surprised by the intimacy of the request. That wouldn't be proper. A smile tugged at his mouth. Mrs. Stone, we're in Montana territory, not Boston society. I think propriety has different rules here. Despite herself, Zara smiled back. Then you must call me Zara. Zara, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. It suits you, unusual but strong. She felt a blush rising to her cheeks. My mother had romantic notions. She read it in a novel. Xavier leaned forward slightly. About spring, Zara, you do have options. Mr. Collins mentioned he'd be happy to extend your position permanently. Hope flared briefly, then faltered. That's very generous, but the cabin. It belongs to the ranch. Eventually, someone else will need it. Not necessarily. Xavier seemed to be choosing his words carefully. The double C is growing. Mr. Collins has been talking about building more housing for married hands. He paused, his dark eyes intent on hers. For families. The implication hung in the air between them. Zara's heart began to beat faster. Xavier, are you suggesting? A cry from Lily interrupted her. The baby had crawled too close to the stove and bumped her head on the wood box. Zara hurried to scoop her up, soothing the infant with gentle words. When she turned back, Xavier had risen, his expression once again composed and respectful. I should check the stock in the north barn, he said. This weather's hard on the young calves. He retrieved his coat and hat, pausing at the door. Thank you for the coffee, Zara. I'll bring more wood in the morning if you need it. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Zara to wonder if she'd imagined the moment of connection between them and what exactly he'd been about to say. The storm passed, leaving the ranch blanketed in white. December arrived with preparations for Christmas, and Zara found herself swept up in the festivities. Margaret Collins, despite her advanced pregnancy, insisted on maintaining all the traditional celebrations. The hands look forward to it all year, she explained as she directed Zara in making dozens of cookies. Many of them have no family nearby. The double C becomes their home for the holidays. Zara understood that sentiment all too well. Her own parents were long dead, and Thomas's family had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with her or the children after he left. The ranch community had become her family in many ways. A week before Christmas, Margaret went into labor. The baby, a healthy boy, arrived after a mercifully short delivery. With Zara assisting the ranch's part-time doctor, Bernard Collins paced outside until the newborn's first cry, then burst into the room with uncharacteristic emotion. Another son. He exclaimed, tears in his eyes as he beheld his wife and child. Margaret, you magnificent woman, Zara slipped out to give the family privacy, her heart full but aching. She'd had no such joyful scene when her children were born. Thomas had been at the saloon when Henry arrived, and halfway to the gold fields when Lily made her appearance, lost in thought, she nearly collided with Xavier in the hall. The baby, he asked, steadying her with a hand on her arm. A boy. Everyone's fine. Zara found herself leaning slightly into his touch. Relief crossed his face. Thank God, the last baby they lost, little girl, didn't even live a day. Zara hadn't known. The revelation made Margaret's kindness toward Lily even more poignant. Xavier seemed reluctant to release her arm. You look tired, Zara. You've been running yourself ragged helping Mrs. Collins. His concern warmed her. I'm fine, just remembering, understanding dawned in his eyes. Your own children's births, she nodded, suddenly close to tears. It was nothing like this. No celebration, no joy from their father. She shook her head. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak ill of Thomas. Why not? The man left his family to starve. There was a hard edge to Xavier's voice. You don't owe him your loyalty, Zara. The raw emotion in his tone surprised her. You sound very certain. I am certain. His hand moved from her arm to her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. A man who could abandon you and those children doesn't deserve your consideration. The touch of his rough fingers against her skin sent a shock through Zara's body. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with such tenderness. She looked up into his face, seeing there an intensity that both frightened and exhilarated her. Xavier, the sound of footsteps approaching broke the moment. Xavier stepped back, his hand falling away just as Bernard Collins appeared, beaming with fatherly pride. "Valero, we have another son," Collins clapped Xavier on the shoulder. "And Mrs. Stone, my wife, is asking for you, something about Christmas preparations that can't wait, even with a newborn." Zara nodded, gathering her composure. "Of course, Mr. Collins, I'll go right away." As she hurried back toward Margaret's room, she glanced over her shoulder. Xavier stood watching her, his expression unreadable. Christmas at the Double C exceeded anything Zara could have imagined for her children. The main house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. The delicious scents of roasting meat and baking pies filled the air, and even the bunkhouse sported festive touches. On Christmas Eve, all the hands gathered in the main house for a celebration. A tall pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with candles, strings of berries, and small carved ornaments. Presents wrapped in brown paper and tied with string were piled beneath it. Henry was beside himself with excitement, running from person to person in his new clothes, a shirt and pants Margaret had helped Zara sew from fabric remnants. Lily, dressed in a tiny dress made from the same material, was passed from admiring arms to admiring arms, basking in the attention. A fiddle player struck up a lively tune, and several of the hands began to dance. Bernard Collins led his wife in a careful waltz, mindful of her recent delivery. Xavier appeared at Zara's side, smartly dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair neatly combed. "Merry Christmas, Zara," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Merry Christmas, Xavier." She smiled up at him, struck again by how handsome he was. He nodded toward the dancers. "Would you do me the honor?" Zara hesitated. "I haven't danced in years. I'll remind you how." He held out his hand, a question in his eyes. Taking a deep breath, she placed her fingers in his. Xavier led her to the area cleared for dancing, placing one hand respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers aloft. As they began to move to the music, Zara felt the familiar rhythm returning to her body. "See, you remember," Xavier murmured, guiding her through a turn. "It was one of the few things Thomas and I enjoyed together," she admitted. Before everything changed." Xavier's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "When did it change?" Zara sighed. "After Henry was born, the responsibilities of fatherhood didn't suit him. He started spending more time in town, at the saloon. When I told him about Lily coming, he barely reacted." Xavier led her skillfully around a pair of younger hands who were dancing with more enthusiasm than grace. "Did he?" He seemed to struggle with the question. "Was he unkind to you?" Zara understood what he was really asking. "Not physically, if that's what you mean, just increasingly absent. Distant, as if we were burdens he regretted taking on." Relief flickered in Xavier's eyes. "Some men aren't made for family life." "And you, Xavier, what kind of man are you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His steps faltered momentarily, then steadied. "The kind who believes in responsibilities, in keeping promises." His dark eyes held hers, "in cherishing what matters." The music swelled around them, but Zara barely heard it. The world had narrowed to this man, his strong hands guiding her, his eyes conveying messages his words did not quite speak. When the dance ended, they stood still for a moment, reluctant to break the connection. "Mama, presents?" Henry's excited voice broke the spell. He tugged at her skirt, pointing to where Bernard Collins was beginning to distribute the packages under the tree. Xavier released her, but not before his fingers brushed against hers in a gesture that felt like a promise. To Zara's astonishment, there were gifts for her and the children, practical items like warm mittens and scarves, but also a carved wooden horse for Henry that she knew, without being told, came from Xavier. For Lily, there was a soft cloth doll with a smiling face. And for Zara herself, a small bottle of lavender water and a book of poetry. "From Margaret and Bernard," the card read, but Margaret winked at her over the baby's head. "Xavier mentioned you loved poetry," she said quietly. "Said he'd noticed your book of Tennyson." The knowledge that he'd paid such careful attention to her few possessions made Zara's heart beat faster. As the evening drew to a close, Xavier approached her once more. "May I walk you and the children to your cabin? It's a clear night, but cold." Henry, exhausted from excitement, was already asleep in Bernard Collins's large armchair. Lily dozed in Zara's arms. "That would be kind, thank you." Xavier lifted Henry gently, cradling the boy against his chest with a natural ease that made Zara's heart twist. Together, they made their way through the moonlit snow to her cabin. The night was indeed bitterly cold, the stars brilliant in the black sky above. Inside, Xavier laid Henry on his cot while Zara settled Lily in the cradle. When both children were tucked in, they stood in the main room, suddenly awkward. "Thank you for the horse," Zara said softly. "Henry will treasure it." Xavier shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "It's nothing fancy, just something to remember his first Christmas here." "It's perfect." She paused, then added, "This has been a wonderful Christmas I didn't expect. What, to be happy again?" There was a gentleness in his voice that undid her. "Yes," she whispered. "After Thomas left, I thought that part of my life was over." Xavier took a step toward her. "Zara, I've been wanting to tell you something, ask you something, actually." Her heart began to race. "Yes," he took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been long since your husband left, and I know you're still sorting out your future. But I want you to know that a sudden cry from Lily interrupted him. The baby had awoken, hungry and disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. Zara moved automatically to tend to her daughter. When she turned back, Xavier had his hat in his hands, clearly preparing to leave. "I should go," he said, though his reluctance was evident. "Let you get some rest." "Xavier, what were you going to say?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Another time, when the moment's right." He moved to the door, then paused. "Merry Christmas, Zara." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with questions and a strange sense of anticipation. January brought bitter cold and howling blizzards that kept everyone close to the ranch buildings. Zara's duties increased as Margaret focused on the new baby, but she didn't mind the work. It kept her busy during the day, though her nights were increasingly filled with thoughts of Xavier. Their interactions had continued in the same pattern of brief, meaningful exchanges and lingering glances. Twice more he had seemed on the verge of saying something important, only to be interrupted or to apparently lose his nerve. It was Bernard Collins who finally brought matters to a head. "Mrs. Stone," he said one afternoon as she cleared away lunch dishes. "A word, if you don't mind." Zara followed him into his study, a comfortable room lined with books and maps. "Please sit." He gestured to a chair, then settled behind his desk. "I'll come straight to the point. Your arrangement here was originally for the winter, with the understanding you might return to your homestead in spring." Zara nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Was he about to dismiss her? "Margaret and I have been discussing matters, and we'd like to offer you a permanent position. Your work has been exemplary, and frankly, with 4 children now, my wife needs the help." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I'd be honored to stay." "Good, good." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "Now, there's another matter, somewhat delicate." He cleared his throat. "It concerns Valero." Zara's cheeks heated. "Mr. Valero." "Come now, Mrs. Stone. I'm not blind, nor is my wife. There's clearly an attachment forming there." Mortification replaced relief. "Mr. Collins, I assure you," he held up a hand. "No need for assurances. Valero's a good man. One of my best hands, reliable, honest, skilled with cattle and horses." Collins leaned forward. "And he's asked my permission to court you properly." Zara stared at him. "He what?" "Approached me last week, very formal about it. Said he wouldn't proceed without my blessing since you're under my protection, so to speak." Collins's stern face softened slightly. "I told him he had it, provided you were amenable." Her mind was reeling. "Why would he ask you and not me directly?" Collins snorted. "The man's traditional, Mrs. Stone, believes in doing things properly, and given your situation with your absent husband, he wanted to ensure there'd be no gossip that might harm your reputation." Zara hadn't considered how others might view an attachment between her and Xavier. Technically, she was still married, though Thomas's abandonment would likely be grounds for divorce in the territorial court. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing to me," Collins replied. "Say it to him. He's been walking around like a man facing the gallows, waiting for me to speak with you." He rose, indicating the interview was over. "Just one thing, Mrs. Stone. Yes, Valero's not a man to take such steps lightly. If you're not of a similar mind, best to be clear with him sooner rather than later. The warning was gentle but unmistakable. Bernard Collins was protective of his hands just as he was of his family. I understand, Zara said quietly. Thank you for telling me. She left the study with her thoughts in turmoil. Xavier wanted to court her properly. The realization should have been shocking, but instead, it felt like the confirmation of something she'd known in her heart for weeks. That evening, after putting the children to bed, Zara heard a knock at her door. She knew who it would be before she opened it. Xavier stood on her small porch, hat in hand. Snowflakes clung to his coat and hair, glittering in the lamplight from her window. "May I come in?" He asked, his voice oddly formal. Zara stepped aside, her heart pounding. Of course. He entered, stamping snow from his boots, then stood awkwardly in the center of her small main room. "I expect Mr. Collins spoke with you today," he began. He did. Zara found she couldn't meet his eyes. "I hope you weren't offended by my approach. I wanted to do things properly." She finally looked up at him. "Why, Xavier? After everything, why me?" The question seemed to startle him. "Why not you? I'm a woman with 2 small children, abandoned by her husband." "I have nothing to offer a man like you." Xavier's expression softened. "Is that what you think, that you have nothing to offer?" He took a step toward her. "Zara, from the moment I found you in that cabin, trying so desperately to keep your children alive, I knew you were extraordinary." She shook her head. "I was desperate, not extraordinary." "You were both." Another step closer. "Do you know how many women would have given up, would have let despair overwhelm them, but not you. You fought, you survived." "For my children," she whispered. "Yes, for your children." "That's what makes you so remarkable." He was close enough now that she could see the snowflakes melting on his eyelashes. "I've watched you these past months, seen your strength, your kindness, your dignity despite everything, seen how you love those children with every fiber of your being." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "Xavier, let me finish, please." His voice was rough with emotion. "I've been alone a long time, Zara, made my peace with it, thought maybe that was my lot in life, and then I found you and suddenly everything changed." He reached out slowly as if afraid she might pull away and took her hands in his. "I know it's soon. I know your husband might someday return, though I doubt it. I know you've been hurt and trusting again won't be easy, but I'm asking for a chance, Zara, a chance to court you properly. To show you and your children that not all men leave when times get hard." The sincerity in his dark eyes undid her last defenses. "What exactly are you proposing, Xavier?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "Nothing yet, that would be presumptuous. For now, just permission to call on you. To spend time with you and the children. To see if what I feel, what I hope you might also feel, could grow into something lasting." Zara looked at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but similarly marked by labor. It struck her suddenly that they were well matched, both shaped by hardship, both survivors. "Yes," she said quietly, "you have my permission." The joy that transformed his face made her breath catch. "You won't regret it, Zara, I promise you that." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the winter chill. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late, and there's work tomorrow." Zara nodded, though part of her wished he would stay longer. "Good night, Xavier." At the door he paused, turning back to her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Sleep well, Zara." After he left, she stood for a long time by the window, watching the falling snow and feeling, for the first time in years, a sense of possibility unfurling within her heart. February passed in a whirl of deepening feelings and cautious steps forward. True to his word, Xavier courted Zara with a patient dedication that touched her deeply. He brought small gifts, a jar of honey when Henry developed a cough, a hair ribbon he'd purchased on a supply run to town, a set of carved wooden blocks for Lily. More precious than the gifts was the time he spent with them. On Sundays, his day off, he would often take Henry for rides on Butterscotch, the boy secure before him in the saddle. He taught Zara to shoot the small revolver he insisted she should have, standing behind her to guide her aim, his breath warm against her ear. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit by her stove, talking for hours. Xavier told her of his life in Texas, of the war that had taken his parents and younger brother, of his years driving cattle north. Zara shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, of her dreams of adventure that had led her to marry Thomas, of her fears and hopes for her children's future. "I want them to have choices," she said one night. "Options I never had." Xavier nodded. "Education then, they'll need schooling." "The nearest school is in town, 10 miles away, for now," he agreed, "but the territory's growing. Mr. Collins has been talking about hiring a teacher for the ranch children. Says his boys are running wild without book learning." It was one of the things Zara most appreciated about Xavier. He spoke of future possibilities as if they included her, included them together, without pressing for commitments she wasn't ready to make. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing muddy ground beneath. Calving season began, keeping all the hands busy day and night. Xavier would often come to her cabin exhausted, sometimes just to sit quietly in her company before returning to the barns. One evening he arrived later than usual, mud-splattered and weary. "Bad day?" Zara asked, taking his coat. "Lost a cow and her calf," he said, sinking into a chair. "Nothing to be done. Calf was turned wrong." Zara squeezed his shoulder sympathetically. "I'm sorry." He covered her hand with his own. "It's the way of things out here, life and death always close together." He looked up at her, his expression somber. "Makes a man think about what matters." She sat beside him. "And what matters to you, Xavier?" "This," he gestured between them. "You." "The children, the chance for something real and lasting." Zara's heart quickened. They had been circling this conversation for weeks, drawing ever closer to declarations neither had quite made. "Xavier, there's something I need to tell you." She took a deep breath. "I've written to the territorial court about Thomas, inquired about divorce proceedings." His eyes widened. "You have?" She nodded. "It's been 4 months with no word from him. The law says abandonment for 3 months is grounds enough." Hope bloomed in Xavier's expression. "And if it's granted, then I'll be free to make my own choices, about my future, about," she hesitated, "about us if that's what you still want." Xavier's hand tightened on hers. "It's all I want, Zara, all I've wanted since that day I found you in that cabin, so brave and alone." He paused, searching her face. "May I kiss you? I've been wanting to for so long, but I didn't want to presume," Zara answered by leaning forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. His arms circled her, drawing her closer, and she melted against him, feeling truly wanted for the first time in years. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I've imagined that 100 times," he murmured. "It was better." Zara laughed softly, feeling lightheaded with happiness. "Yes, it was." He opened his eyes, suddenly serious again. "I love you, Zara. I think I've loved you since that first day, seeing you standing so fierce and protective despite your fear." He cupped her face in his hands. "And I love your children as if they were my own. I want to be a father to them, a husband to you, if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes. "Xavier, are you certain? Taking on a ready-made family, I've never been more certain of anything." His thumbs gently wiped away her tears. "Say you'll marry me when you're free. Say you'll let me build a life with you." The answer rose from her heart without hesitation. "Yes, yes, I will." His smile was radiant as he pulled her into another kiss, this one a seal on their promise to each other. The first week of April brought 2 momentous arrivals to the Double C, the season's last major snowstorm, and a letter from the territorial court. Zara's hands trembled as she broke the official seal. "It's granted," she whispered, scanning the document. "On grounds of abandonment and failure to provide, I'm free." Xavier, who had been anxiously pacing her cabin, stopped dead. "Truly," she nodded, looking up at him with shining eyes. "Truly. As of March 30th, I am no longer Mrs. Thomas Stone." He crossed to her in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "Marry me now," he said when he set her down. "Today, tomorrow, as soon as the preacher can get here." Zara laughed, dizzy with joy. "The roads are blocked with snow." And I have nothing to wear, and I don't care about any of that, Xavier interrupted, kissing her soundly. I only care that you're mine and I'm yours and we can start our life together. Henry, who had been playing nearby, looked up curiously. Why is Mr. X kissing you, Mama? Xavier knelt down to the boy's level. Henry, I've asked your mama to marry me. Do you know what that means? Henry frowned in concentration. Like Mr. and Mrs. Collins, exactly like that. It means I would be your papa and we would all live together as a family. Xavier's voice grew gentle. Would you like that, Henry? The little boy's face lit up. You'd be my papa, for real, for real. Xavier held out his arms and Henry launched himself into them. Over the boy's shoulder, Xavier looked up at Zara, his eyes conveying everything words could not. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, after the snow melted enough for the circuit preacher to reach the ranch. It was a simple affair in the main house, with the Collins family and all the hands in attendance. Zara wore a new dress of pale blue calico, sewn by Margaret and herself in the evenings. Henry, scrubbed clean and solemn with responsibility, carried the rings on a small pillow. Lily, now nearly a year old and taking her first tottering steps, was held by Margaret during the ceremony. When Xavier kissed her as his wife, the cheers from the assembled ranch hands nearly raised the roof. Bernard Collins produced bottles of good whiskey, and the celebration continued well into the evening. That night, after carrying their sleeping children to their new home, a small but sturdy house Xavier and some of the other hands had built over the winter, husband and wife stood together on their porch, looking up at the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Valero?" Xavier asked, his arm around her waist. Zara leaned into him, savoring the name, more than I ever thought possible. He turned her to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something. I'll never leave you, Zara, not like he did. Whatever comes, whatever hardships, we face them together." "I know," she said simply. And she did know, with a certainty that filled her heart. This man, who had first appeared at her door with bread when she was starving, had proven his character in 1,000 ways since. They had begun with a simple act of kindness, bread for a hungry family. They would build a life on that foundation, day by day, season by season, together. 1 year later, Zara stood on that same porch, watching Xavier approach on horseback. Henry, now 4, raced down to meet him, and Xavier swung the boy up to sit before him in the saddle. Lily, a sturdy 2-year-old with her mother's determined spirit, toddled after them, arms raised to be lifted as well. Zara's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of the new life within their child, conceived in love, who would arrive with the summer. As Xavier reached the house, children laughing in his arms, his face lit with the same joy that filled her heart, Zara thought back to that desperate day when a stranger had knocked on her door. How close she had come to losing everything. How miraculous that the same knock had ultimately given her everything. "Welcome home," she called to her family. Xavier's smile, tender and true, was all the answer she needed. They had found in each other what both had thought lost forever, not just survival, but happiness. Not just a home, but a future. Not just bread for the body, but love for the soul. And that, Zara knew, was the greatest gift of all.